So my goal with this playlist was to make it easier for people to understand what to think about when they install a Gentoo system and a Linux system in general, I guess, and kind of guide people through a selection of software that makes the system easy to use. And then when I was thinking about this, I realized that I should probably have started by explaining what a Linux distribution is, because Gentoo is a Linux distribution. And I guess maybe someone is gonna stumble on this playlist without knowing what I'm talking about. So if I'm gonna explain everything from the start, I should start with explaining what a Linux distribution is. And basically, it all started back in 90s, where internet was not very common. And if you wanted to install something on a computer, you needed a floppy or a CD or a DVD. Well, maybe DVDs didn't even exist back then. So you had a floppy or a CD, basically, that you would get when you bought some software or yeah. And then when you sell something, you're distributing it. And if you're selling a Linux operating system, you're distributing Linux. But Linux is free. There's no cost with it. So you're not actually charging for Linux, because Linux is free. You're not charging for any of the utilities, because those utilities are also open source and free to share. So what you're actually charging for when you sell Linux on a floppy or CD, you're charging for the way that you package it and the way that you deliver it to the customer. For example, a coffee cup. If I'm going to buy a coffee cup, maybe someone is going to send this to me separately. They're going to send the plate in one package, and they're going to send the cup in a different package, which could be good. If one of them breaks, I can still use the other one. Someone else is going to put the cup upside down during the transportation. They're going to put a lot of tape around it to package it very securely and make sure that it comes to me in one piece. And then I can just unwrap it and start using it. And I have both pieces at once, which is good for other reasons, like I can instantly start using the cup instead of having to put it together to different pieces that might arrive at different times. So any product that you distribute, you have to package it somehow. So this is what a Linux distribution is. It's a way of packaging Linux. And it's not only packaging in terms of putting the different components together. It's also selecting the different components to use. It's a user experience that you're packaging. You could either package a fast and lightweight system that is going to work on very simple computers, or it could work really, really fast on an advanced computer. You could package a fancy system with lots of special effects, fancy laser pointers, or I don't know. Anyway, this is not going to run on a simple computer, but maybe someone who has a powerful computer is going to enjoy that special effect stuff that's going on. You could package an easy-to-use system, but because you're making it easy to use, you have to sacrifice something else. This is what Windows does and Mac OS and so on. Or you could package a system that enables the user to make a very detailed configuration, which is what Gentoo does. But this here as well, the user has to sacrifice a lot of time to make that detailed configuration, and even more time in learning about the different parts to make that detailed configuration. So, I mean, the easy to use system in the coffee cup case would be to have just a coffee cup with coffee in it, and you get it, and you just push a button, it's going to heat up, and you're going to drink it. Whereas the detailed configuration system is that you can choose your plate, you can choose your cup, you can choose your coffee, you can choose hot or cold water with the coffee, with ice or not. You can choose spices to put on it, and well, you put it together yourself, right? And different users desire a different experience. So that is why we have around 600 different Linux distributions. But the first distributions started out a lot more simple than that. One of the first distributions to emerge was Slackware. So Slackware, what they did was they took a lot of different software and they packaged each software in a tar archive, which means that it was compressed, like zip or anything else. Because it's compressed, it takes up less space. And then they started using FTP servers to distribute these instead of CDs and floppies. You could also get floppies. I think the first distributions were something like 70 floppy disks or something like that. And because there's so many floppy disks, it's just annoying to use. So then it was a great benefit to package it with the tar archives to reduce the size. And they also package a certain setup of the Linux kernel with the GNU utilities, different programs and applications that most people will use. And they also used an X window system for a graphical user interface, but not really configured. You have to set this up yourself mostly. Red Hat was another early distribution that made their own binary format for the archives, which enabled them to put some more information in the archive on how to deliver it and so on, how to install it. They also had very early implementation of the X system for the installation. So they have a graphical user interface even in the installation and configuration of the system, which means that the Red Hat system was a lot easier to use, a bit like the Windows system. Debian had a bit of a different approach. They combined the binary and tar archive formats into their deb format for delivering the software. And then they built a very good dependency system for packages so that when you have two different softwares that's going to talk to each other, one software is going to increase the version, it can't talk to the other software in the old version, so that also has to increase the version. And then they had a way of describing those dependencies that was very good. And that is kind of the same as the graphical user interface, that the graphical user interface makes everything easier, and the dependency system that Debian had also made everything easier. But this was easier even for the advanced users. So Debian was always been a very popular distribution. And then people didn't like some things of this, like someone didn't like x386 and they wanted to substitute that for x.org. So then Slackware was branched out to different distributions. Like I think SUSE is based on Slackware, OpenSUSE, who then said that, well, we want some of these things that Slackware are using, but OpenSUSE switched to the binary format of Red Hat, the RPM. And yeah, so they're all kind of borrowing parts from each other to create new distributions and new ways of delivering these user experiences. And that's why we have so many distributions, because there are many different ways of delivering a working system to the user. So another thing about these distributions is that you can release it in two different ways. Back when you had floppy disks and CDs, and when you have DVDs as well, I guess some people still use that if you have a very slow internet connection. You're gonna package a DVD in a way that everything works together really well. It's very well adapted to each other. So you're gonna make sure that all of the dependencies are solved in a good way, that all of the different parts, all of the different applications work well together. You can drag and drop files from the file manager to the word processor and it will open it automatically or something like that. And then you're going to have a lot of work going into making sure that everything works well together. And you're going to release it as a point release, where at one point in time, you have a system that is very stable and works well, everything works well together. The other way is made possible by internet, where you have an FTP server to transfer files at any time you want, or rsync or whatever you want to call it. But so when someone starts developing a piece of software, they're going to have the 0.1 version, where it's an alpha version, it's a very early version. Then you're going to have a beta version, which is maybe 0.2 or 0.3, and you're going to have a few more betas after that, up until you get to 1.0, which is the stable release. If you have a rolling release, you can take part of all that development and see what's happening with the software. You get to use, like, oh, we fixed this bug, so now it's working a bit better, and so on. So a rolling release, you get the newest bug fixes and some problem is solved. On the other hand, if this release reaches 2.0 a bit earlier, like here, for some apps, and then other apps, they don't reach it until here, then you're going to have a time period where some programs maybe don't communicate well together because they move to a newer version. And then you could end up with some problems. On the other hand, some of the fixes in these small versions could be fixes to bugs, or fixes to like some hacker can take advantage of your system and break in or something like that. So it's a security fix. So there are many good reasons why you want a rolling release, but there are also many good reasons for why you want a point release. And again, this is something that just contributes to having more distributions and more way, because people desire different things. So if we compare two distributions, for example, Debian versus Gentoo, we can see that Debian has a point release and Gentoo has a rolling release. Debian mostly uses binary packages, and if you install something from source and you build it yourself, it will probably end up with some problems and some difficulties, because the Debian package management system doesn't track source installations very well. Whereas Gentoo uses source packages as default, which then means that you have to spend a lot of time waiting for that source to build into a binary. But that binary is going to be built for your system. It's going to be so much faster. So if you spend a lot of time with the computer, you're going to notice some performance gains. Debian, when you finish the installation of a Debian system, you're typically going to get the Linux kernel. You're going to get some utilities from the GNU, commands and stuff. You're going to get the apt or synaptic package management that is delivering these packages for you. You're going to get some setup of x.org with a GUI, for example, the GNOME desktop environment, and so on. You also get lots of applications like LibreOffice for Word, Excel, and so on. You get some games, lots of different apps like Firefox, Chromium browser, and so on and so on. Whereas with Gentoo, when you finish the installation of Gentoo, you have Linux, you have the GNU utils, and you have the bash shell. Then you also have the Portage package manager, which will help you install the source packages. But that's all you got. If you want Xorg, you have to set it up yourself with Portage. It's not part of the Gentoo distribution. And that's the reason why you don't have Xorg, is because maybe someone wants to use Wayland. So then they're not going to install that default because you have to choose it yourself. Maybe someone doesn't want GNOME, they want KDE or they want LXQT. Then you don't want to include GNOME, you want people to be able to choose that themselves. So a finished installation of Gentoo is a lot more bare bones. It's almost nothing included in that because you're supposed to choose it yourself and configure it yourself. And that choosing and configuring is what I want to do in this series. Because somehow we want to end up with a system kind of like the Debian system, but where we made all the choices ourselves. Okay.